So as you are aware, and as we had in our introduction for the worship service, we are in a worship series throughout the fall called Love the Sinner, Hate the Cliche. Last week we focused on everything happens for a reason. But in this series, we're taking a look at some of the cliches that you and I and lots of other well-meaning people have used with each other as we navigate life together. And all of them are meant to be helpful, but upon closer inspection, it's not always the case. Over the course of the next few weeks, we're going to take a close look at some of the most popular cliches that circulate in the Christian community. And chances are that, like me, you probably used some of these from time to time. And understand that this isn't intended to make you feel bad about having used it, but instead we're really going to look at how these cliches can be heard by somebody who's going through a difficult time, and maybe alternatives or other ways that we could help those who are in need. I think we're going to discover along the way that these cliches, they can do more harm than good sometimes. They can communicate things about God and about faith that we really don't mean to communicate. We'll also suggest some things that we might be able to be more helpful as we go into the future. So this week, Lisa Farrett is joining us. She's going to talk about her journey as she's cared for her son, Brian. So Lisa, I've heard the cliche lots of times. God won't give you more than you can handle. I mean, it's even a song on Christian radio these days. But where have you experienced this cliche in your life? What was that like?
Well, I heard that message over and over again after Brian was diagnosed with Batten disease. It was very troubling to me because it meant that God actually gave Brian this disease. So
for those of you who don't know the Farretts, Ryan worships with Eric and Lisa and Christina every week. He's a 25-year-old young man who's with us in worship just about every Sunday. He has Batten disease, which is a genetic disease that Ryan's had for all of his life. Except he didn't demonstrate any of those symptoms until he was about 4 years old. Before that, he was just a typical, healthy little boy. At first, the doctors thought that he was going blind. They thought that he was losing his eyesight. But then after more testing, the Farretts came to find out that Ryan has the juvenile form of this terminal neurodegenerative disease. He gradually lost his sight until he was blind at 15. He suffered from seizures and dementia. At 21, he was relegated to a wheelchair. And now in these later stages of the disease, he's not able to walk and talk anymore. But he can still understand and everything that's said to him and everything that goes on around him. A challenge, I'm sure, as a parent. And I'm sure you've heard this cliche over and over again. So in the times you've heard it, has it been helpful? Has it been comforting? Has it been frustrating? What's it been?
Well, I'll tell you, it wasn't helpful to me at all. It caused me to feel angry at God. I remember one specific Sunday when all that I kept thinking was how hard it must be for my son to believe that God loves him, when his ability to see was being gradually taken away from him.
So do you think that God causes things to happen to people?
Not anymore. I think that God causes things to happen, doesn't cause things to happen to people. I think that illness and tragedies are caused due to the fact that we're a fallen creation, and it's not the perfect world that God originally intended it to be. Ryan's illness was caused by infection.
So what's the downside to this cliche?
I think the downsides are that this cliche can cause a person who's struggling to become really angry with God and possibly lose their faith. When Ryan was first diagnosed with Batten disease, I heard this and many other harmful cliches from members at my church. When I spoke to people about Ryan, it seemed very distracting, and they either offered me a cliche like the one we're speaking about today, or just changed the subject. It caused me to feel very alone. I started to feel like I was receiving more support from teachers at Ryan's school than from members of my church. I felt like I was slowly losing my faith in God. But deep inside, I knew that I couldn't allow that to happen. if I lost my faith, I would surely fall apart.
So you and your family have obviously kind of wrestled personally with this for all of these years. And as you've done that, what's happened to your faith? How is it different, or how did community help?
Well, the earliest memory I have of receiving help was when I was speaking with a Iranian special education teacher. She shared with me that she had gone through a really tough time when her mother was suffering from cancer. It really helped her to speak with a social worker. So that's what I did. I started seeing a social worker who was somewhat helpful. But the problem was, she was Jewish, and most of what I was struggling with were questions related to my faith. At one point, I asked another parent who had 2 children with Batten disease if she still believed in God. She was considerably older than I and had been part of the Batten Disease Support and Research Association since it began. She said that she wasn't sure if she still believed in God, but she had noticed over the years that people who had a strong faith seemed to have an easier time dealing with the disease. So I continued to pray for answers to many questions that I had. I tried attending a Bible study at church, and still I wasn't finding what I was looking for. Then one day, I was getting my hair cut, and the hairdresser, Tina, started telling me how much she loved the church that she was going to. Lo and behold, that church was Ascension Lutheran. I had wanted to try to go to Ascension for many years, but my husband really was very attached to the church that he grew up in. Finally, I decided that I would have to start going on my own. I had actually gone to the church service at Ascension once before, but this time was different. Anita Quinn noticed that I was new to the church and started talking to me. She invited me to coffee hour and listened attentively to my story. She also invited me to join welcome. Well, I don't think Anita knows how important that day was for me. But from then on, I started to find the answers I needed. There were a few times along the way in which I began to feel really overwhelmed with sadness. I truly believe that God placed just the right people in my pathway at just the right time. I read a book written by Connie Jackson, a parent of 5 children, 3 of whom had Batten disease. In her book, entitled Nothing Can Separate Us, she talked about getting together with her Bible study group. I could tell by her writings that this group is what gave her the strength to get through each year of the day. So I prayed to God that I would find a study group that would help me. Strangely enough, within the next couple of weeks, the prayer share groups were initiated at Ascension. I eagerly signed up. This Bible study was totally different than the Bible study that I attended previously. We read Rick Warren's book called The Purpose-Driven Life. And there was open and honest discussion about how the members felt about the scriptures we read. I began to find answers to many questions that I struggled with. And I also learned to trust that God would guide me to make the right decisions and hold me up under the tremendous stress I was under 24/7. Even though my faith has grown, there have been times along the way in which I started to feel like I was drifting away from the core of my faith again. But God always leads me to a place in which I could once again find peace. One such time was when my mother was very sick. Now, not only was I watching my son suffer with this horrible disease, but I was watching my mother suffer too. I again started feeling very angry with God because I forgot all I had learned about suffering. So I decided to go to the adult retreat ministry to see if I could find some guidance. At the retreat, I heard people saying that Pastor Kwan was going to be a spiritual leader at the next Trace Diaz weekend. Trace Diaz is a community of people who spread their love and faith to others, and anyone's welcome to join. I've always felt that Pastor Kwan has a lot of wisdom, and one of his sermons that addressed why God allows people to suffer was particularly helpful to me. is so helpful, in fact, that I asked him for a copy of it so that I could look back at it from time to time. The fact that Pastor Khan would be there told me that it was time for me to try it. Well, it turned out that I never spoke to Pastor Khan all weekend. But it was the group discussions and sharing of God's love that led me back to peace of God. After the Tres Dias weekend, I realized that I have to stay in contact with people who feed my faith if I want to feel at peace. Faith is like the root of a tree. When you don't keep feeding it, you start wandering out onto the branches and sometimes almost feel like you're going to fall off. And that makes you lose the sense of peace that it provides. I also found out that I constantly need to be reminded of the knowledge that I've gained. There are so many times that I will hear something during a Bible study or read a devotion and say, oh yeah, I knew that before. I forgot.
So if we're not comfortable with saying God will only give you as much as you can handle, then what can we say instead?
I don't think you really need to say anything. You really just need to be an active listener and respond or repeating what you've heard. It's also important to share your own story of struggle and your own questions. And when you see someone in church that you never saw before, do your best to start a conversation with them and be welcoming.
I think that's really helpful, Lisa. Thank you for sharing your story. Very brave to stand up in front of a group of people and talk about something so emotional. As I've been reflecting on it over the weekend, hearing your faith journey, and I look out and I realize that you're not alone in that struggle. You look out and just the people that I know of, I know there are many who are gathered here today that are struggling with caring for children or spouses or parents who need special attention and other financial strains and other issues that just I know about. I can only imagine other struggles that people have that I'm not even aware of. And all of us, I think, when we have those times, we can get isolated, we can feel alone, and that the weight of the world is crashing downwards. But in 2 Corinthians, Paul writes that we have a faithful one who suffers along with us. And he may not take all of our burdens away or take all of our cares and worries away, but he says that there's nothing that God can't handle. And maybe instead of saying that God won't give you more than you can handle, we say God can't give you more than God can handle. Because He's always there with us. His power and His strength is with us. And maybe even better than that, maybe even deeper than that, is to say that God can't give us any more than we can handle. Because as Lisa beautifully reminded us, it was in those moments where she felt alone that it was others who seemingly randomly came into her life. We all know that there aren't random things, right? That God placed people like Pastor Crum and Anita and Tina in her life at those moments so that she could find what she would need. All of us, from time to time, feel that complete, crushing burden in our lives. And that's why God gives us one another. So that we can ask for help, so that we can open ourselves for that help. And also for us to have our eyes open, so that when we see someone who's new, someone who is down, someone who seems isolated and depressed, that we can reach out to them to make a difference. The reality is we can't do this all by ourselves. But God's faithful. God provides that peace and that hope in all the challenges that we face. God helps us look at every situation, even the most awful ones, with eyes of hope. So instead, we can say this: God doesn't give us just what we can handle. God helps us handle what we've got. It's with God's help. It's through the gift of Christian communities, through our brothers and our sisters, that we can handle life together. And for For that, we give God thanks.